So that being said, we can start off with, you wanted to go strength and
strength. And I love that you mentioned the fact that it is possible to increase strength without increasing muscle size, at least not dramatically, because I think it's not just weight class athletes. I know a lot of people who, for aesthetic reasons, they'd like to be stronger. They're hearing that having strong bones and strong muscles and tendons, it's great for longevity and for avoiding injury and so many other features of life. And yet they don't want to fill out progressively larger and larger sizes of clothing.
And we can go harder to the mechanisms on that piece if you want, or we can save that and come back to it.
Sure. What I'd love to, what I'd love to know was if we could define some of these modifiable variables in the context of strength. So let's say we're somebody who, I come to you and I say, and let's just say for sake of balance here, because she actually does do some weight training, I bring my sister in and I say, me and my sister both want to get stronger.
Yep.
What modifiable variables should, how should we modify the variables?
Love it. All right, great. I'm going to do Inception on you one more time. So one of my other laws, this won't be fast, I promise, of strength and conditioning is, in general, the default is all joints through all range of motion. So this is important because it's going to answer your very first question on this strength category. So in general, the ankle should go through the full range of motion in the ankle. The knee should go through the full range of motion, the knee, the hip, the elbow, et cetera, right?
Across the workout, not in a single movement.
Well, right.
I would hope. Well, unless there's an amazing exercise I haven't heard about.
Well, there are some exercises that we're going to call more full body. Think about a full snatch. Mm-hmm. Like you're going to take a lot of your muscles, a lot of your joints through a lot of the range of motions. Other ones, like in isolation, we call these single joint exercises. So imagine a bicep curl. You have one joint in that particular case, the elbow moving, the shoulder, and everything else is pretty much stable. And this is how we'll differentiate multi-joint from single joint movements. But yeah, so across, I would even say it doesn't even have to be the day, but maybe throughout the week. Try to get every joint through full range of motion. Now, a couple of quick caveats to that. I am not advocating using full range of motion and allowing really bad exercise technique. So when I say full range of motion, that's the default. That doesn't mean every single person can do that for every single exercise. It means that's where we should be striving to, and that's our starting point. You're going to see a lot less injury and a lot more productivity out of your training sessions. In fact, the science is fairly clear on this one. Strength development as well as hypertrophy is generally enhanced with a larger range of motion of training. And the mechanisms are like somewhat understood on that. So that being said, if you have to get into, say, a bad position with your, say, low back, the spine is a very good one here. In general, the spine should stay very neutral is what we call it. So no flexion, no extension, especially in the lumbar region. So if you're doing, say, a deadlift, and in order to take your knee through a full range of motion on a deadlift, you have to compromise your back position. That's no bueno. So caveats there aside, don't kill me. Like in good positions always.
And don't kill yourselves, more importantly.
So why that matters is if we walk through strength, the very first thing I'm going to go through is the exercise selection. So let's choose an exercise which ideally has a full range of motion or close to it that doesn't induce injury for you, that you can still maintain good neck and low back and position and everything else. You feel comfortable with, so you can feel strong, but you don't feel like, oh my gosh, if you've never snatched before, having you do a snatch for a maximum, even 75%, like it's a terrible idea. You're not going to feel confident. It's going to be a train wreck. I would rather put you on a machine bench press. So you can go, I feel stable, I feel safe here, and I can just express my strength. So exercise choice in general, full range of motion, and you want to kind of balance between the movement areas. So this is an upper body press. So this is pushing away from you, bench press, things like that. Upper body pull, pulling an implement towards you. Bent row, pull up. The pressing should be horizontal, so perpendicular to your body, as well as vertical. So this is lifting a weight over top of your head, lifting a weight away from you. The pull version is pulling horizontally to you and pulling vertically down, pull up, things like that. From the lower body, we typically call these hinges. It's sort of a funny muscle thing that no one's going to laugh at, but like maybe me and you here, is we'll categorize muscles or movements, exercises as pushes and pulls, right? So like a squat tends to be a push because you're pushing away the ground. A deadlift is a pull because you're pulling the implement up to you. But in reality, every single exercise is only ever a pull because muscle doesn't push things away. Muscle can only contract and pull on itself. And so, again, super nerdy thing that like most people are like, yeah, and everyone's like, that's so dumb.
No, but I think it's a really important point because it also speaks to something I think we'll get into later, which is that, posterior chain, anterior chain.
Totally.
And if that's mysterious to people, it'll become clear before long. Posterior chain, anterior chain makes a lot of sense to me because of the way it's grounded in the firing of motor neurons, which is ultimately what controls muscle. So it's also, I think,
nerves all the time.
Exactly. So it also depends on the lens through which one looks at life and exercise. And of course, my lens is primarily neuroscience. So, but I realized that the importance. I like this idea of pushing perpendicular to the body, overhead, pulling both toward the body and from overhead. That just makes really good intuitive sense, especially since a lot of people were just listening to this and not watching it. So in your minds, folks, you can think about pushing away like a punch or overhead, like lifting something overhead and then pulling toward your midline or toward your body rather, and then pulling yourself up like a pull-up in PE class for those of that.
So the lower body's the same thing, right? It's some sort of pushing away like a squat or a split squat or a lunge or something like that. And then some sort of, again, what we'll call pull or hinge. So a deadlift or a Romanian deadlift or a hamstring curl or something where you're contracting and pulling the thing. And you could split these into like 1,000 different categories. If you're really in that field, you're going to want to add a bunch of other ones. But that's just like a rough conception. So if you were going to do a single workout, you could choose 4 exercises. And you could choose one of each. One press, upper body press, one upper body pull, one lower body hinge, one lower body press. And that would be like a decently well-rounded exercise. That's your exercise selection. And if you're taking those through a full range of motion, you're at a pretty good spot, as close as you can. The next one is intensity. So if you want to develop strength, this comes back to one of my favorite scientists of all time, who happens to be a nerve guy, actually. And generally, I like to shit on nerves as much as I possibly can because I'm a muscle guy. But I have to give Henneman some credit here, right? And I know you know who that is.
Henneman size principle.
Yeah, of course, right? So this is a series of papers, I think it was in Nature.
At least some of them, yeah.
Yeah, in 1954, 56, or like something. You can fact check me, I'm sure you will. But he basically outlined this idea that, there's a certain recruitment threshold needed for neurons to fire. And we have muscle fibers in what we'll call fast twitch muscle fibers and slow twitch muscle fibers. And in general, you're going to activate the slow twitch ones first because they tend to be associated with low threshold motor neurons. It's not exactly that way, but it's close enough, right? Well, the only way that you activate some of these higher threshold neurons is to demand the muscle to produce more force. And it's fairly specific to force, right? It's not something you can do over an endurance thing, right? Unless it gets really extreme and fatigue happens. So in general, the only way to use these big chunks of your muscle, which are incredibly important for aging, by the way, one of the major problems we have with development of aging-related issues with muscle is the fact that we lose fast twitch fibers preferentially. And then we have major problems as we go down the line because we've lost a big chunk of our strength and size. So you want to make sure these fibers stay alive and intact. Okay, so if that being said, the only way to develop strength is then to challenge the muscle to produce more total force. If you are fairly untrained or new, I guess I should have stated this all at the beginning as well. One more inception, then I'll stop. When it comes to this level of detail of exercise prescription, a fairly untrained person is going to respond basically the same to every single thing you do. In fact, we've done this in the lab many times. We've done training studies doing things like 30 minutes of cycling and seeing huge increases in muscle strength and size, which is not a prescription for most people to increase size, but people that are really untrained, if you did plyometrics or strength training or endurance running, they all just get better at everything. So that caveat kind of aside, if you want to be more intentional and more specific to the goal of strength, you need to produce more force. Specificity matters, right? So we have size principle to help understand this, and we have our laws of specificity, which say said principle, right? Specific adaptation to imposed demand. So the adaptation you get or the result of your training is going to be a reflection of the demand that you imposed. So if you want to get stronger, you need to impose a demand of strength, not repetitions. So the load has to be very high. In general, you're probably looking at above 85% of your 1 rep max. If you're moderately trained, maybe 75% will work. Lowly trained, again, everything works. But in general, we want to be pressing a load that's very high. So because the intensity demand is so high, that is going to force you to do a low repetition range. You can't do 12 reps at 95%. then it wouldn't be 95% of your 1 rep max. So by definition, true strength training is really going to be in like 5 repetitions per set or less range. That's where most of it's going to occur for specificity. So we've covered choice, intensity, and repetitions, right? The total amount of sets that you do is really kind of up to your personal fitness level, right? If you did as little as like 3 sets per exercise, that's probably enough.
Work sets.
Totally. Yeah, totally work sets, right. So get fully warmed up and build up to that 85%. Don't just walk into the gym and throw 85% on and go, thank you. That's an important distinction. So work your way up, do some, like a very classic warm-up thing would be like a set of 10 at 50%, a set of 8 at 60%, a set of maybe 8 again at 70%, and then maybe like a set of 5 at 75%. So 2 or 3 or 4 sets kind of building intensity and lowering the rep range. And then you would go after your 2 or 3 working sets. Also, in terms of rest intervals, now because we're trying to, the primary driver of strength is intensity. It's not the volume, right? It's the intensity. So in order to maintain that, we have to do a low repetition range. But in addition, we also have to have a high rest interval, because if we have any amount of fatigue incur, and we have to then either reduce the reps or reduce the intensity, we've lost the primary driver. We've lost that main signal. So the number we're going to throw out typically is like 2 to 4 minutes. So imagine you did, your set of bench press and you did 5 repetitions at 85%. You probably want to rest 2 to 4 minutes before coming back to the bench. That doesn't mean you have to sit there on your phone. Like, in fact, please don't. Like, everyone will thank you for not doing that, I promise. You can engage other muscle groups. This is what we call supersetting. So you're doing your bench press, and while that 2-minute clock is running for your chest to rest, you can go over and do your deadlifts. And so, you can kind of move back and forth, and this is how you can make strength training a not 7-hour workout. If you're a professional athlete, you're going to take that time because you want to maximize the outcome. We've done this actually in our lab too. Supersets will reduce the strength gains, but by a tiny amount. And most of us don't care enough relative to it's going to triple the length of your training session. It's not worth it. So for the average person, I will tell them, yeah, superset. For someone who's trying to break a world record in weightlifting or powerlifting, I don't superset.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I've found that I don't recover particularly well from strength and hypertrophy training. So
like in the workout or the next day?
From workout to workout, unless I keep the total duration of those workouts, I like to say no more than 60 minutes of work, real work.
Yep.
Maybe 75. Past 75, I find that I just start to,
That's a lot.
I have to introduce additional rest days, or I just get weaker over time. So I'd set a kind of a limit at 50 minutes, and then I usually violate that limit and end up doing 60 minutes. So I'm excited to hear that one can superset exercises as long as they work different muscle groups, of course.
Yeah.
Right. So I wouldn't want to do like bench press and overhead press supersetted because we can eat. I think that goes without saying for most people, but just to point that out. But that I could do some push pull without compromising total intensity that much. And I certainly would be willing to give up a rep here or there, or a few pounds here or there,